If I had to do it over. Hi, everyone. Leo Notenboom here for askleo.com. It is interesting to take a look at where I am. I want to say how far I've come, not in the sense that, I was walking up some really difficult ladder. I'm very fortunate to be where I am. The thing is, it's not where I would have predicted. It's not what I was thinking of when I was back in school. And as a result, knowing where I am today, what I do for a living today, I would have chosen to do a couple of things a little differently back in school. And I wanted to talk a little bit about exactly what those things were and why. But first, a little bit about how I got here. When I started in high school, I really didn't have a good sense for what it was I wanted to do for a career. I'd had some experience playing with things. Certainly know I took a lot of things apart that didn't get put back together again. I got a lot of encouragement from a TV repairman who I've written about on my personal blog. And the net result was that when I ended up applying to university, I simply specified an interest in quote unquote electronics with no real further clarification than that. I kind of figured that whatever my future held, it was probably related to electronics in some way. Fortunately, this was early enough in things that I want to say the entrance requirements were lower. And I don't necessarily mean that in a bad way. I simply mean that the demand for getting into the College of Electrical Engineering, which is where I landed, was lower, that they hadn't put up some of the barriers that they put in recent years. Those barriers being you had to first go to the university, perform to a certain level, get certain grades, and then you could apply to the College of Electrical Engineering before actually being allowed to go in. No, in my case, because I said electrical engineering on my application, the University of Washington simply placed me there. They put me in the College of Electrical Engineering, which was great. So the first year or two, not a lot going on, right? Taking the classes that were prerequisites. But one of the classes that was a prerequisite is a class that quite literally changed my life. It's Engineering 141, Introduction to Fortran Programming. It is something that I've written about in a little bit more detail on my personal blog. And it's one of those things where it was a required class. I had no expectations going in. I had never touched a computer before going in. So this would be like the end of 1975, beginning of 1976, actually, apparently in my freshman year. It changed my life because I loved it. It was amazing. In fact, the scenario that I've described to people in the past is that I encountered programming. I discovered that I was really good at it. I discovered that I could help other people taking the class at the same time, which is kind of like this weird, really weird 40-year precursor to Ask Leo. And the big takeaway for me at the time was not only did I love it and I was good at it, people would pay me to do it. I mean, it's like the perfect storm of criteria for a career. So after I graduated, I got myself a job at a small company in Seattle. It was small and getting smaller, as it turns out. They went from 25 employees. There were 3 people in the software department at the time. They manufactured a small data entry terminal based on a 8-bit microprocessor. There were 3 people in the software department when I started. I was the software department when I left. But was really interesting about that company is that because it was so small, and especially because it was getting smaller, I ended up becoming kind of a jack of all trades. And I discovered that being a jack of all trades was a real asset. Not only was I writing software, I was debugging software, I was documenting software, I was testing software, I was explaining software. I ended up writing documentation for the software because there wasn't anybody else to do it. It was really educational and really got me a lot of experience in a lot of different venues, a lot of different arenas. A few years later, when that company was clearly on its downturn, I ended up applying to another company that happened to be local to the Seattle area that I had heard of, and in fact that I had used software created by, and that of course was Microsoft. In 1983, I joined Microsoft. In fact, that was my introduction to networking and the internet, or what at that time was the nascent internet, that would end up defining, again, a lot of the rest of my career. My first email address, for example, was an @microsoft.com email. I learned a lot about a lot of different things. Once again, being a jack of all trades turned out to be a very, very interesting, lucrative, handy characteristic to have. I was not only writing software, although there were other people around to do things like testing and documentation and so forth. What really ended up happening is that I ended up leveraging a lot of communication skills at that point, because especially when you work for a large company, especially a company that's growing at the rate Microsoft was in those days, you end up communicating with a lot of people. I ended up writing a couple of magazine articles. I ended up writing a lot of internal documentation. I ended up managing people, which was another skill that I ended up acquiring while I was there. And it was, again, a really good time that, once again, allowed me to exercise a lot of different skills in a lot of different ways that were more than just programming a computer. So, of course, eventually I left Microsoft in 2001. A couple years later, I fell in with, well, actually right away, but I eventually started askleo in 2003. What had happened was I fell in with a bunch of internet entrepreneurs, a bunch of people who were at the beginning of what the internet would turn into, the internet that we now know. And they were basically one of the first groups of people to be actively developing, designing, and building not just online businesses, but lifestyles that revolved around having an online business. And that's ultimately what caused askleo to be created. In the now 18 and a half years since then, askleo has grown. It's been around. I've got thousands of articles written on all sorts of different questions that have happened over that period of time. What I said back then is still true today. There is no shortage of computer questions. There are no shortage of opportunities for people who can communicate the answers to those questions to help people through the difficulties that they have with technology. So one of the realizations that I had some years ago is that, yes, I was a software engineer. I wrote software. I still play with technology. I love doing it, but I had become a writer. In fact, if we go all the way back to my first days at my first company, I'd always been a writer. In that first company, I wrote a newsletter. I wrote documentation because there was nobody else to do it. And it was relatively good. At Microsoft, I had written a couple of technical articles that got published in a couple of Microsoft's magazines. They had technical magazines at the time. I wrote lots and lots of internal email. Remember, email is writing. And that's something that I took to heart very early on. I didn't think of it as my job. I didn't think of it as being a writer. I was a software engineer. But being a software engineer involved a lot of writing to people, because you don't develop software in a vacuum. You deal with other people. So where does that lead me to? If I had to do it all over again, if I could talk to my high school self 40 mumble years ago, I would have taken more writing classes. I would have spent more time, paid better attention in English class. I would have taken Latin instead of Spanish as a quote unquote foreign language. My school did offer Latin, because Latin really does help understand written English. I was a writer. I am a writer. today. And had I known that that would have been not only my destination, but such a strong component of everything that I was doing throughout my professional career, I would have spent more time learning how to be a better writer from day one. Now, one of the problems, of course, is that back in school, I hated writing with a passion, which is odd when you think of how much I actually enjoy writing today. It dawned on me, again, one of these revelations that happens between then and now, is that it wasn't writing that I hated. It was writing about things that I didn't know, things that I didn't understand, and most importantly, things that I really didn't care about. You know what school is like, right? One of the ways they force you to prove that you know something is to have you write about it. Well, if it's something you don't care about, and certainly something you don't know about, but you're forced to write about it, that's going to give you a very negative impression about writing as a technique, writing as a skill. It's not the writing that was a problem for me. It was the writing about stuff I didn't care about. Once I started writing about things that I knew, things that I understood, and things that I enjoyed writing about, technology, it came to me pretty naturally. I still would have benefited from the skills had I learned them back in school, but there it is. I didn't. I had to make it up as I was going along, rather than coming at it with this strong set of skills out of school. One of the other revelations, and it's something that I actually try to get across, and it's one of the reasons that I share this story of my own, is that we are all writers. I don't care what you do for a living. I don't care where you do it. I don't care what it is you think your job is. Your job may be that, absolutely. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's not your job. But you are a writer. Whether you're writing emails, whether you're writing notes, whether you are someone that publishes or not, that doesn't really matter. What matters is that we now communicate through the written word. That can be email, it can be texting, it can be posting on forums, it can be anything that you currently see yourself typing or on your mobile phone typing in, or however it is you cause text to be entered. You're a writer. Why does that matter so much? Well, here's the thing. As you might imagine, because people ask me questions in written form, I see a broad spectrum of writing ability. And to be honest, there are people asking me questions who couldn't write their way out of a paper bag. They have no way, they don't have the skills to make what it is they're thinking, what it is they're saying, what it is they want to ask coherent. It's really unfortunate. Now, I do have to have a little aside here. One of the skills that I've developed over the years is that I get a lot of questions from overseas, from people for whom English is not their native tongue. I understand that. And honestly, it's actually not that difficult to tell when somebody is in that situation. It's very interesting, and maybe a discussion for another day, but it's not that difficult to tell when I see something that's written to see whether it's actually someone who is writing English because it's their second language or not their native tongue, or someone for whom English is their primary language and they just can't write worth a darn. The difference is stunning in many cases. And the ESL people, the English as second language people, I cut a lot of slack. I do. I have a tremendous amount of patience for that because ultimately, one of those little factoids about me is that English is technically my second language. I only spoke Dutch until I was 3 because that's what was spoken at home. Once I, turned 3, the neighbor lady taught me English. I went to school in the United States, so I learned American English throughout, which is why I speak English like a native. But the fact is, it's my second language. No, the folks that I have a lot of frustration about are the folks who should be able to speak English as their first language and can't write worth a darn. That's really frustrating. And of course, it's frustrating for me because I'm trying to interpret the questions. That makes it really difficult for me. And on days where I have less patience than others, that's one of the criteria that I might use to skip a question. It's not fair. I will grant you that, because I don't know, of course, how people arrive at that lack of skill, that lack of writing ability. But here's the thing. It matters. It is not fair, but you are being judged by the way you write. There was a vocabulary product several years ago, I just remember the ads for, and their tagline, their sales line was to say, people judge you by the words you use. It's true. It's not fair. I'm not going to say it's fair in any way, shape, or form, but it's also out of your control. What is in your control is your ability to communicate and communicate well. What is in your control is to write clear written English. Even English is not fair. But the fact is, and I think a lot of people outside of the United States, outside of the English-speaking world understand this, is that a tremendous amount of information on the internet is in English. A tremendous amount of the resources available on the internet, like askleo, are in English. You are communicating to them and reading their information in English. I get it. I'm not going to say it shouldn't be in your native tongue. But the fact is, it is what it is. And that just strengthens the argument that you really want to be able to read and write English proficiently and clearly so that you are more able to express yourself or ask your questions in a way that will be understood. I know, even as a writer today, even as someone who does this now for a living, I think I've got relatively decent skills. I still wish they were better. I still wish that I had spent more time in school understanding and writing and learning how to be a better, a clearer writer. If you're in a situation where you can learn from my experience, please do that. Sign up for the extra English class and pay attention. Know that writing about stuff you don't care about, it's part of the price you pay, I guess. Write about something else. Find excuses to write about things you do care about. I think you'll find you're having a lot more fun. I know that's exactly what happened to me. It doesn't have to be technology for you. It could be whatever it is. But the bottom line is, every time you write, be it a paper, an article, a blog post, or an email, remember, it's a skill that the better you develop that skill, the more influence you'll have, the better you'll be understood, the more confident you will feel about how you communicate with others around you. The better you'll be judged. I hope this has been helpful. My experience, like I said, it took me 40 plus years to get here, right? Doesn't have to for you. You can take these lessons and hopefully improve on your written skills. For updates to this article, which has been around for a while, this isn't new, this is the first time I'm recording this kind of a video on it. The article's been around for a while. For updates, for related links, for comments, and all that stuff, I'm on askleo.com/21960. I'd love to hear what you have to say about this. This is so incredibly important in my opinion. Until then, I'm Leo Notenboom, and this is askleo.com. Thanks for watching.